You know, I do my part to help the environment. I put all my empty Holston pills in the bottle bank.
Choose products that aren't overpackaged and recycle whenever you can.
You mean like this banana peel?
You can recycle a banana peel?
Sure.
Recycle. Aluminum beverage cans today. Aluminum food containers tomorrow.
Hi, here's why everything you've been taught about recycling is wrong. So, at least on paper, recycling kind of seems like a no-brainer, right? Like, I don't want to see this stuff put in some landfill. I'd rather see them be given new life. There's something, dare I say, spiritual about that idea.
When you recycle, you give things that would otherwise go to waste another life.
Oh, it's you again.
The little one's yours. They've got your eyes.
Unfortunately, recycling is not that straightforward. So, in order to understand where this problem comes from, we've got to go back to the 1980s, where two big interests are starting to clash. So, on one hand, you had the public, and the public was becoming more and more aware of big environmental problems. Things like pollution and, yes, plastic waste were becoming more frequent conversation topics.
Worried about insecticides, pesticides, food additives, carcinogens. Worried about radon gas, worried about asbestos.
And on the other hand, you had the plastic industry, and their goal, well, it's to sell more plastic.
I just want to say one word to you. Just one word. Plastics.
So as you had this public awareness, people were putting more and more pressure on governments, especially local governments, to ban plastic. And that posed a threat to businesses who relied on plastic goods to produce things cheaply. Remember when McDonald's breakfasts came in these? Things kind of came to a boiling point when the city of St. Paul voted to ban plastic. And that sent the plastic industry into a frenzy. They called on this guy.
Literally, me. I had no staff.
The industries turned to him to develop a recycling program, which he did, successfully. This kept the public happy because they could now feel much better about their plastic consumption, and this made the industry very happy because now the public, as taxpayers, would be footing the bill for recycling plastic.
Making recycling work was a way to keep their products in the marketplace.
So the thing is, recycling has always been a bit of wishful thinking. 91% of what gets put into the recycling bin doesn't get recycled. Most often, it just ends up being burnt in a landfill. See, different materials need to be processed differently, and all that sorting out can be pretty labor-intensive, right? Some really weird stuff ends up here. It can be tempting to think that once we've taken out the recycling, it's no longer our problem. But it's somebody's problem. And for a long time, that somebody has been China. For the past 20 plus years, China has been taking over half of the world's recycled goods. Now I could very easily assume that every other thing I put into the recycling bin would find its way to China. And strangely, this was a system that worked. At least kind of. It gave American cities a place to send their recycling to be sorted and taken care of. And it gave China, well, a lot of profit. This is Zhang Yin, China's first female billionaire and one of the richest people in the world still. Back in 1995, she started a company called Nine Dragons. They went all in on buying scrap paper and plastic from large companies, and they had a pretty good system for doing this. So throughout the 1990s, so many Chinese-made goods were being shipped overseas to the US and Canada and Europe. She realized that these large cargo ships didn't need to be going there full and returning empty. Instead, they could be filled with plastic, and that could be one person's trash, but Zhang Yin's treasure. So thanks to these corporate infrastructures and the Western world's need to send their plastic waste somewhere and cheap labor in China, this system persisted for most of my life. It wasn't a total win-win because of all the environmental impacts, but you can at least see why it went on. But then came 2018.
The country began enforcing new restrictions on imports of recycled materials known as the China Sword.
China basically stopped taking in the world's recycling, with very rare exceptions. There's a number of reasons why they did this. Over time, the US and other countries really relaxed the practice of sorting out different materials to be recycled. Everything just kind of goes into the same bin. On China's end, this increases the amount of work that needs to be done and decreases the amount of profit. You've also had packaging get more complicated. Things have more and more colors and use a wider variety of materials and textures. That makes the recycling process more complicated. And then there's also the fact that China is simply a very different country now than it was in the 1990s. There is an increased interest in environmental issues and wanting to take pride in environmental efforts, and this hasn't always been there. This was the formal reason cited by China for its national sword policy, along with wanting to invest in more profitable industries like technology.
Out on the streets, it just don't look good. Now there's something you can do. Drinking soda is fine, but when you're through, recycle it. Bottles and cans, recycle it. Lend a hand. Recycling centers are in your town.
So this sudden change threw our system into shock. We still had tons and tons of plastic waste, but now we had nowhere to send it. The first thing we did was look at China's nearby neighbors. They weren't having it.
We cannot be bullied by developed countries. We will fight back.
So just after China passed their policy in 2018, Malaysia became inundated with plastic waste. A lot of illegal processing plants appeared, and their operators were hoping to avoid environmental regulations in order to turn a quick profit like they'd seen people in China do before. But some of the waste showing up was so toxic that it couldn't avoid the government's attention for very long.
Now we know that garbage is traded under the pretext of recycling.
Shortly after this declaration, Malaysia sent back 150 large containers full of plastic waste. 43 went to France, 42 went to the UK, the US got 17, and Canada got 11. The Philippines sent back 69 containers of waste to Canada. Canada accepted, but they wanted to pass the bill for that shipping on to Chronic Inc., which was the company responsible for sending that to the Philippines in the first place, rather than putting the cost onto taxpayers. Chronic Inc. denied their involvement, and this escalated into a large rift, resulting in the Philippines withdrawing its top 2 diplomats to Canada. Sri Lanka, Indonesia, Cambodia were other countries who also responded similarly.
Every day we throw away a little of ourselves. It's time to care, pitch in and share. You know we can help. Recycle America.
So the fallout of this has been pretty big. Across the US and Canada, a lot of municipalities have had to scramble in order to find new markets for their plastic waste. And a lot of smaller towns and rural areas have entirely cut their recycling programs.
The city of Beaumont is ending its recycling program by the end of the month. And
I'll say goodbye to recycling if you live in the city of Deltona.
Cities across the country are facing what the nonprofit Ecology Center has called a slow-moving recycling crisis.
So I totally get how this is frustrating and maybe even overwhelming to hear about. Our expectations for what happens when we drop our stuff off in that bin really don't match what actually happens. I was a bit surprised to hear some people were actually pretty optimistic that all these sudden changes might lead to us finding a system that works better. Meanwhile, it's helpful to remember that when you hear people talk about reduce, reuse, recycle, that all 3 of those things are not equally weighted. Reducing what we use in the first place is leaps and bounds better than even the best recycling program, because then you think about the energy that doesn't get used on production and transportation and marketing. Look, I hate the feeling that something good I thought I was doing really hasn't had much of an impact at all. Definitely not the impact I thought it was having. But I think it's important to remember that the reason why recycling got so complicated in the first place is that it was never so much designed to solve a problem as much as it was designed to solve the way we feel about a problem. Rather than effectively reducing waste, it's simply transported waste. I think it's important to remember that our efforts to do good need to go beyond wishful thinking. Got to remember that every single product we use has an origin and a destination, and things are not just out of sight, out of mind. Thanks for watching my video on the scandalous world of recycling. Be sure to like and subscribe for more. I'm really looking forward to producing more content on nature, culture, and adventure, especially once I can hit the road again. Until then, take care. See you next time.